This is Garis Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 481, entitled Biconscious Masculists will continue to attack Monoconscious Feminists until they become biconscious. Description. This flyer claims that masculists will continue to attack monoconscious feminists because monoconscious feminists fail to see that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, with their decades-lasting oppression of men. For example, their financial parasitism of men, paternity fraud, pill lying, etc. Masculists see monoconscious feminists as molehill feminists who complain against relatively minor issues when the issues addressed by masculists are hugely more significant and must be addressed. Monoconscious feminists will be confronted soon by very angry, hateful masculists who will bite their fucking heads off if they don't soon become biconscious and see that gender oppression is not a one-way street. Now the flyer itself. Biconscious masculists will continue to attack monoconscious feminists until they become biconscious. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Whenever I hear some feminist, some of course monoconscious feminist, give a feminazi rant, I feel, as a biconscious masculist, very angry. And when COVID is over and public meetings are a thing again, I will attack her with my masculist anger, my masculist hatred at the ways that women oppress men, and in ways that are far worse than vice versa. Instead of writing in the third person, I'll think out loud, putting my thoughts in first person to make them more personal, and I hope more emotionally persuasive and convincing. So imagine, I'm at some public talk at my local university, and some feminist, some monoconscious feminist, who by definition has only had her feminist consciousness raised, who has been brainwashed all her young life, in brackets, I'm 74 at the time of writing, November 2021, that gender oppression is a one-way street, that it is women who are the oppressed, and that it is men who are the oppressors. So naturally enough, monoconscious feminists are angry at men for the ways that men oppress women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, etc. This monoconscious feminist feels fully justified in her lashing out at men for the ways that men oppress women, since she has studied such oppression for decades of her life. She's now about to have the shock of her life, as some very angry, hateful masculist in her audience stands up and begins his masculist tirade of her, emotionally and intellectually crushing her for the MFB that she is, that is, a monoconscious feminazi bigot, showing her that the thing she complains about regarding men's oppression of women is small beer in comparison to women's far greater oppression of men. I imagine that that very angry, hateful masculist is me, and that the following is the type of thing I would say to her. At the time of writing, this is still just a fiction in my mind. But with the first world now coming out of COVID lockdown and more effective COVID vaccines coming onto the market, it's only a question of time before the scenario below becomes a reality, which obviously I will report on in future videos as I experience in the real world how monoconscious feminists react to hearing biconscious masculists for the first time in their lives, experiencing the shock when they realize that as feminists they no longer have a monopoly over gender politics and that in fact the Masculists are lashing out at them, claiming that women oppress men far worse than vice versa. Here is my probable diatribe that I will blast at her, the monoconscious feminist, who for all her life has believed the feminist doctrine that gender oppression is a one-way street. When this moment comes, that is in reality, I doubt that I will be given an uninterrupted interval in which to give my masculist spiel. So take the masculist tirade below with a pinch of salt. F, that is feminist, that is monoconscious feminist. Quote, in female voice. One of the primary aims of modern feminism is to dismantle the patriarchy, that is, the domination of society by men. We women, we feminists, are out to create a society that is ruled half by women so that women's interests are addressed politically and socially in the parliaments and in the boardrooms, so that women have half the power, half the say as to how society functions and how society is governed. In the universities today, in many campuses in the US, there are now 2 female students to 1 male student. So as the decades passed, that dominance of womanhood to manhood in educational levels will translate into a much greater level of female power. We will see the dismantling of the patriarchy to be replaced by a higher degree of matriarchy than history has ever known. End quote. M, that is masculist, that is Biconscious Masculist. Quote, you feminists live in a fairyland. Most of you are both iscyanate and innumerate. That is, you are unable to think scientifically and mathematically due to your ignorance of science and math. So you tend to live in a fairyland, believing what you want to believe without evidence, which makes your credibility no better than that of religionists or flat earthers. If you're free to believe in whatever you want, you're free to believe in the tooth fairy. In reality, the patriarchy, as you put it, is not going to disappear because it is largely genetically determined. Thanks to you women, with your hypergamous instincts, in brackets, that is the female instinct to mate with a superior male, to get his superior DNA for her kid, so that her kid has superior DNA to hers, which is obviously beneficial for the species, so evolved, close bracket. You are sexually selecting men to be smarter than women. Women have always had a monopoly over reproduction. It's the woman who decides whether a given man will ejaculate inside her to get her pregnant. So women have been sexually selecting men for thousands of generations who had characteristics as men that were in women's self-interest to sexually select, to sexually filter. In practice, women chose men who were taller, bigger, stronger, fiercer, smarter than women. Why? Because taller, bigger, stronger, fiercer men were more able to protect her in the distant past against other tall, big, strong, fierce men in the tribe, and particularly against male warriors of enemy tribes. Women chose to offer their vaginas to smarter men because smarter men made better hunters and hence were more sexploitable by women. Since women have been sexually selecting these male traits for thousands of generations, it's not surprising that men are taller, bigger, stronger, fiercer, smarter than women. In any society, the smartest members rise to the top, since high intelligence enables individuals possessing it to outwit and to intellectually dominate lesser minds. As a result of this sexual selection of smarter men by women, women have 10% smaller brains than men, are dumber than men on average by 4 IQ points, have an IQ variance that is 10% smaller than men's, so that the morons and the genii are males. So it's not surprising that women have won a pathetic 1% of science Nobel Prizes. Women have 10 times lower testosterone levels than men, so are much less aggressive, ambitious, dogged, persistent, so complete difficult tasks far less readily than men, so are much less respected by men than are men by men, since women accomplish so little, inventing almost nothing, building almost nothing, creating almost nothing. Women lack genius. There are no female Beethovens nor female Einsteins. Men do not respect women for the simple reason that women's achievement track record is so grossly inferior to men's. We men only tolerate you women because of your two traditional monopolies of vagina and womb, in brackets, which, by the way, you are about to lose thanks to male engineering genius. The sex bots are already here with their film star faces, their luscious curves, their creamy, grippy vaginas, which are increasingly equipped with AI, that's artificial intelligence, based conversational abilities. Japanese scientists have already grown a goat in an artwomb, that is artificial womb. So when men can grow their own kids and prefer to sex their bots rather than the 40% of women who are obese and the 30% of women who are fat, then men will be much less motivated to be nice to women and will treat them with much greater rudeness and much greater impatience at women's many inferiorities as judged by men. For example, women's nagging, women's controlling, women's withholding of sex, etc. As men, we are forced to be nice to you women because we want to penis you. To men, your only real source of attraction to men are your vaginas. We men don't respect your minds, since your female minds are so inferior. You women lack genius. You women have always been parasites of men. Men evolved to understand and manipulate the world, and women evolved to manipulate men, using sex to bribe men to give women male-hunted meat, and to protect women from other men and from starvation. It's only during the past half-century or so that you women had been released from your traditional role of being fuckholes, baby factories, and child raisers, thanks to men who gave you science-based medicine, the pill, household gadgets, higher education, etc. So that the modern woman now has a life expectancy of 85 years, and so has a career window of half a century. Even the woman who takes, say, 6 years off work to stay at home raising her very small children, then goes back to her career after the second child is off to kindergarten, still has a career window of half a century, so has a powerful moral obligation on her part to get off her fat parasitic ass and fip up, that is, become a fip, in brackets, a masculist label for a financially independent person, a very important concept for the masculists, who are essentially out to free men from decades of manslavery to fluffy parasites, close brackets. A fluffy, another masculist term based on the word fluff, is a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man, thus manslaving him for decades of his life, a major gender crime in the eyes of the masculists, far eclipsing rape as a gender crime. Masculists are abolitionists, out to free men from manslavery at the hands of the hated fluffies, whom masculists are out to destroy, to exterminate slowly, by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, thus forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and as masculism spreads throughout the culture, spat at. We masculists aim to put a masculist group in every high school, every campus, to force women to fip up, to study career competent majors at high school and college so that they don't expect fluffy style to parasite off the money and labour of a man for decades of his life, a huge gender crime against men. We Masculists estimate that about 80% of young women at the critical age of 16 choose to become fluffy crappers. That is, choose to study fluffy crap majors that will result in them ending up with fluffy crap diplomas that the economy will pay poorly for. So these fluffy crappers will become fluffies as adults. They will screw around in their 20s and hit the wall in their 30s when their biological clocks tick hard, pushing them to want to have babies. But with their fluffy crap diplomas, they can't afford to buy a middle-class house to raise her kids in. So she then goes looking for some gullible, stupid, man-slavable man to parasite on, bribing him with sex so that he pays for the middle-class house he raises her kids in. The average modern woman on the pill and filled with feminist doctrine that women can be as promiscuous as men has had dozens of penises in her by the time she's in her 30s. So her eventual manslave husband will be her 41st penis. After a decade of marriage and her 2 kids and house, she will be bored with him and drag him to the fluffy feminist controlled divorce court system and have him financially slaughtered, losing custody of his kids with a 90% probability, losing half his wealth, half his stuff to her, forced to make child payments to his kids whom he will barely be allowed to see. And if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony so that she can continue to parasite off his money and labour after the divorce the way she did before the divorce.